This is ESG Decoded, the podcast powered by Global Affairs Associates to provide relevant, actionable updates related to business innovation and sustainability. Join Caitlin Allen and Amanda Shea of Global Affairs Associates for thoughtful, nuanced conversations with industry leaders that explore the complexities, the risks, and the opportunities connected to all things ESG. I'm Yvonne Harris, a consultant and co-host, and I will be collaborating with Caitlin and Amanda for the discussions that we will present on this podcast. Put simply, ESG is everything that is not on your balance sheet. This leaves room for misunderstanding, oversimplification, and the tendency towards one-size-fits-all perspectives. None of that will happen on this podcast. Enjoy this episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of ESG Decoded. I am Yvonne Harris, and I am spending time today with Julianne Miles. Hi, Julianne.
Hello, Yvonne. How are you?
Doing good. So glad we get to talk today. I know you are a well-known talent development leader in the business community, and excited to just spend a few moments with you talking about talent development and, what are some of the current trends in TD beyond COVID, now that we're kind of moving out of obviously 2020 into 2021, and then what do you see as some of the opportunities and challenges that we face even as we're rounding the corner into 2022? But for our listeners, Julianne and I go way back. I've been friends for quite some time, and we actually both have common background in the recruitment space and talent development. So walk us through your career, Julianne.
Sure. I was actually trying to calculate it the other day, and I want to say we met each other in 2005, 2006.
I think so.
It's a long time ago.
I
was a baby. I was young. So I actually came out of college and worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is where you and I met, and started my career as an accountant, which was quickly determined not my skill set. And so quickly took a quick pivot started in university relations and then kind of built my HR career from there. So did UR at PricewaterhouseCoopers and then had an opportunity to go over to BP, big oil and gas giant that I'm sure most of you guys have heard of. And we kind of started from scratch. They had scrapped a lot of what their university relations team was historically doing, and we built a whole new program. Did that, really enjoyed my time working in oil and gas, but decided I really needed to get out of the specialized side of recruiting and expand into different parts of HR. So did an internal transfer over to our talent development team, working in subsurface, where I got to do things like succession planning and really a lot of development focus. BP was very good at individualizing development and helping people reach those goals by moving them into roles that were going to enhance their experience and provide them a new skill set, new learnings, et cetera. So unfortunately, downturn of 2015 with oil and gas, was laid off from BP, and then ended back up in a recruiting role with Daikin, which is a large air conditioning manufacturing organization. So back in recruiting, but looking at it from a manufacturing perspective, which was very different kind of slant than what I had done in the past. So that was a great experience. And then again, transitioned into development before I left them, and then took a job back in oil and gas at Seadrill, which was in 2019, and was really doing a lot of activity with Seadrill focused on development, succession planning, talent reviews, leadership trainings. And I think I learned more in that 1 year at Seadrill than I did in probably the previous 5 or 6 years of my career. So that was a great experience, which came to an abrupt end when COVID hit. And so again, was laid off again by oil and gas and took some time off, kind of regrouped. And then I joined Hearst Media in December. So that's where I'm currently at.
Well, and to connect to the last pivot that you made in your career, 2020 was a year like none other for many people and their career trajectories, many of which came to a halt. And on this podcast, Julianne, we talk about all things ESG. So today we're focusing on the S, the social impact, the impact to people And we're now a year plus into this global pandemic reality. And what does this mean as it relates to impacts on companies, on organizations, and by extension, on talent development?
And it's an interesting kind of position to be in, because I felt like I was a product of that.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I'm back in a company, I can kind of speak to, a lot of different perspectives. It was certainly a year of tragedy, not just the pandemic. We obviously had a lot of social injustice, which is still happening, unfortunately. And being in Texas, even weather, it's just been a bizarre year of all sorts of random things that are all happening all at once, and kind of building this storm that companies are having to evolve and pivot and really kind of get out of their comfort zone a little bit. You always think, when you were at work, you kind of had to keep your personal life out of it, right? You would connect with your coworkers and that sort of thing, but there was this line that kind of divided work from personal. And I feel like in the last year that line has disappeared.
Yes, it is no longer there. That's for sure.
It is no longer there. And from an organizational perspective, I think it caught a lot of companies by surprise. Who would have ever thought that we would have survived or, and encountered all the things that we've encountered in the last year. And it kind of knocked the wind out of the sails of a lot of individuals as well as companies. And I feel like from a people perspective, from an organizational, me as the talent development person within a company, we kind of had to take a step back and really think about how do we want to engage with the people within our organizations? How can we be better supporting them? From a pandemic thing, I think everybody probably spent the first 6 months last year just trying to figure out how to help their employees set up a home office, right? How do we get this remote thing going? A lot of companies weren't necessarily set up for that. So from a IT perspective, hardware perspective, how do we get the employees the tools that they need so that they can continue working? And obviously the company can continue to be successful financially. But then it was also, how do we help our people survive this, right? I mean, people were getting sick. We had kids that were, working or learning from home. How do we balance all these things and provide our employees a support network from that perspective, which kind of that line then became, obsolete, right? The managers were stepping into personal lives of people saying, how can I help you? How can I support you? What do you need? And now that we're kind of a year in, we've got vaccines coming out, the numbers are going down, things are starting to look as though it's taking a turn, fingers crossed. How do we then pivot again? And what do we need to be doing now as an organization to kind of keep that momentum going, if you will?
So what are the current pain points? You've just taken us kind of through the year that was, but as a talent development leader right now, what are the pain points? What are the challenges that we need to find solutions for?
So I think from my perspective, the biggest one I've seen in my organization, as well as looking around and connecting with colleagues, is, people are exhausted. They're mentally exhausted. They're emotionally exhausted. They've been sitting in a computer for a year now. How do we re-engage them and kind of refresh, right? People aren't taking vacations because there really wasn't anywhere to go. So there was little interest in taking time off to just sit at home and do nothing, right? So, people are just worn out. And how do we help them get past that hump? Forced vacations is certainly not an appealing option. That's not something that a lot of people would feel good about. But can there be little things that we can do as a company to give them that refreshment, right? Whether it's doing something fun. I was just looking online and, people are doing all kinds of contests and things to kind of get the mood a little lighter. We've had such a overwhelming year. How can we kind of lighten things up a little bit and make it a little bit more refreshing? Spring is here, let's go outside and look outside and the flowers are blooming and, those sorts of things. So I would definitely say, finding ways to help those employees have a new perspective. But I would also say that engagement is also important as well. It's kind of this conundrum and the push-pull of, we need people to disconnect a little bit as far as taking a break, but at the same time, when we are with them, we need them to be engaged. And there's this whole new word of presentism or presenteeism, I forget how you say it, but people are checking in and they're sitting in these meetings, but they're just checking a box and they're showing up. They're not engaging, they're distracted, they're doing other things. So how do we kind of get around that? So that's, the current challenge of, especially from a talent talent development perspective. If I'm trying to do a training class or a leadership program or something like that, and people are just showing up, they're not engaging, then there's really no value to be achieved out of that. And it's potential money lost by the company because we spent money to do it, but yet we didn't get the benefit that we were hoping because maybe it wasn't delivered in the right way, or we didn't necessarily take it as far as we could have as from an engagement perspective.
So I know that we realize safety is always first, but let's dial into this a little bit. Are you finding that some organizations are trying to go to a hybrid, working remote, working from the office, just to get people out of their homes and back in the work setting, maybe to be a little bit more productive?
I do see that, and I see a lot of people asking for it because they need the change. I'm in a lot of networks, and one of the networks that I'm in is talking about doing a retreat in, I think it's like September. Mm-hmm. And they're like, do you want to do virtual? And there was a bunch of us that are raising our hands saying, no, please let us go somewhere. We want to go somewhere, just to have that change. And I think people are also looking at that from a returning to the office perspective. You've kind of got people in different spaces right now. Maybe some people are not ready to go back. There's that fear that's still out there in society about, is this really over, or could it, flare again? And then where are we going to be back at the same place we were this time last year? I think there's companies that are ready for people to go back, especially if it's impacting productivity for sure. And then there's people who are kind of in the middle that are, I think it's been proven over the last year that a lot of roles can be remote, and we don't have to have people physically in an office anymore, which I feel is going to open a lot of doors in a lot of different ways. If you think about, and we can get into this a little bit later, but like from a diversity perspective, right? If I'm a working mother and I no longer am required to go into the office, that relieves a little pressure. Mm-hmm. Same if you're a single father, if you're trying to balance all these things and you feel as though you have to be in an office from an 8 to 5, that adds pressure to your life. And having this flexibility, and companies now realizing that we no longer have to have this physical space to be productive. We can relax a little bit and provide people a little bit of space. It saves money on real estate costs from an organizational perspective. It gives employees certainly the benefit of flexibility. I can be doing a load of laundry right now while I'm talking to you, which saves me the hassle later. So, I think that whole balance, I don't see the pendulum swinging back completely to what it was. I think there's going to be a nice kind of swinging back and forth in the middle of what works for the company and what works for the employee, and how can we meet in the middle.
And speaking of meeting in the middle, and just focusing on the word meeting, we're in meeting overload. We're in Zoom overload. I think Zoom fatigue is now an official term. What are some best practices in the space of talent development where we can just kind of address this issue, Julianne? I'm getting tongue-tied even as I'm talking about it, but it just seems like from sunrise to sunset, it's Zoom meetings and people are saying enough, but I'm not sure that organizations are really hearing it.
And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think there's still a little bit of need to be checking in, right? We all want to make sure that things are happening and that we're all working towards achieving, business goals and objectives. I think there's this need to connect with people. And if that's the only way we can do it, then book a Zoom meeting. I think as leaders, we really need to be thoughtful about, is this really need to be a meeting, or can we just have a quick chat? Do we have to formalize it? Does it have to be on video? Is this something that we could just be doing, as we each take a walk? I've heard this concept of walking meetings, where it's like, if you're just having a discussion and there's really not a need to have a pen and paper and feverishly taking notes, go for a walk and have that conversation, to get out of the house and, get a little exercise and kind of break that zoning in on your computer of staring at the screen. Another thing I heard companies are starting to do is, you can format Outlook to schedule meetings at 30 minutes or an hour. Well, if you were to do it for maybe 20 minutes or 45 minutes, then you're not necessarily going to end up in back-to-back meetings. You actually get a chance to get up and grab a snack if you need to. I think people are getting creative with fun ways to, if you still have to have a meeting or you need to have those check-ins with your teams and your employees, adding a little fun to it. And actually, I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was so excited to have the conversation because it just brought up so many new ideas. They were adding a diversity lens to it, which I thought was really cool. And it was cultural spotlights, and it was kind of like an icebreaker, but it also enhanced understanding the different cultures of the people on the call, which I thought was such a nice little blend of accomplishing so many things at one time. Obviously DE&I is taking a huge forefront given the events of the last year, and it's building that into your everyday activities. And by talking with your teammates in that perspective, you get to learn so much more about them and understanding. For example, we just had a big Christian holiday. Okay, well, as a Christian, I'm happy to explain that, but I'd be interested to hear how the different religions celebrated or didn't celebrate. What were some of the traditions that they have, and really opening up that dialogue in a safe space, right? Where everybody's sharing and learning and having a little fun, so that Zoom fatigue isn't quite so severe.
So leveraging meetings to discuss other topics of interest to employees, touching on DE&I topics or any other type of people culture or engagement topics.
Just to break up the, hey, we're all here, let's talk about, this task that we all need to do, which is, mundane and a little dry. How can we liven this up a little bit? Maybe start with that and then get to the business at hand.
Well, and let's be honest, though, I think some of the feedback has been, we just want not to meet, right? So it's not even don't make the meetings more engaging. It's how do I just get more of my time back? How do I turn work off? What are you seeing employers doing as it relates to disconnecting and allowing employees space to breathe?
Yeah. One thing I've actually personally done, which has become hugely handy in this particular time of remote working, is blocking my calendar.
Okay.
And if I have a list of things that I need to get done, I typically will block like the first hour of every day, which depends on what time you're doing and how do you work. Are you a morning person or are you a late person? But I've got that space on my calendar saved for me to do what I need to do. That way I don't end up with meetings all day. And at the end of the day, I haven't been able to tackle my to-do list, right? It's kind of built in. I put it as busy and people know that they can't pick a meeting during that time. I think something a lot of other organizations are doing, and we've actually considered it and discussed it, is blocking days as no meeting days. The trick to that is it has to be enterprise wide, right? One division can't decide to do no meeting Wednesday. And then if you work in a role that works across division, you have other people booking meetings on your no meeting Wednesday, because that's not necessarily something that they're observing. So things like that really need to be managed at, the enterprise level, and the whole company's participating, and that can still be an effective way. If you were to do the first half of a Monday and the second half of a Friday as no meetings, that kind of alleviates the whole coming back from a weekend, getting your feet under you, and then also getting things done before the weekend hits, so that you're not feeling like things are carrying over. So, that's certainly an effective way to do that as well.
Well, and that's helpful, but let's be honest, many employees now need an extended period of rest. And you mentioned earlier, forced vacations, not attractive, not something any organization, really wants to have to implement. But Julianne, how can we encourage our employees to take some time? There has to be a reason that you can take a couple of days off, even if it means staying at home, but just so that you are resting your brain and you're focused on things that are not work related and hopefully refreshing in some type of way.
And I really feel like that comes down to the managers having those direct conversations with their employees. And this is the time where I think employee engagement and employee people focus has become a very important piece of an organization's kind of daily business, right? I mean, we were all kind of doing the whole check in with your employees, make sure everybody's okay at the beginning of all this, but it doesn't need to stop, right? That's still an important aspect of being in touch and kind of being that coach and the mentor for your employees. So if I'm a manager and I've got 6 direct reports and I'm continuously checking in with them, and you're on the Zooms and you're talking about work, take the time to say, How are things going? I know it's been a long year, and have those one-on-one conversations with them to say, I really feel like now is a good time. We're in between projects. Why don't you take a couple days to just go work on your DIY project or whatever it is that you feel like you've been putting off, the last 6 months or whatever it might be, and then work with the employee on that. I think the forced thing just immediately turns people off because they may not necessarily feel like that's a really good time for them. But I think if the manager is in tune with what's going on with their team, he or she can then say, we're in between those projects, or this part of the project is being managed at this point by somebody else because that's the phase we're in. Your workload, hopefully is not as significant. Now's a good time. And then you can kind of move it around the team, as the work kind of ebbs and flows amongst the individuals, do a half day here, do a 1 day there, whatever it is that's going to work, 3-4 days, if that's possible, great. But it does take that conversation, I feel like, with the manager to really figure out what's going to work best. And then I think the employee is going to feel a little bit more comfortable knowing it's been jointly agreed upon. And that the manager's not going to feel like, oh my gosh, they just took off and left us in a lurch. This was due and it didn't get done. And now we're late, we're behind.
Well, and even before COVID, to build on to what you just described, when you encourage people to take time off, there's also that ownership from the manager and the team not to send dozens of emails to the employee when they know that they're checked out. Respect the time, respect the space. And if it can wait till they come back, there's something about coming back, Julianne, and you have like dozens of emails. It just makes you almost regret taking the time.
Mm-hmm. I've been there. I have been there, and I feel like leadership is kind of, that's where leading by example is really important, mm-hmm. right? And that comes from the top down. If the leaders are recognizing that the folks underneath them need that time and space and they're leaving them alone, then the manager is more likely to do that for their direct reports, and it works its way down the line. So, setting that expectation, kind of having that as your culture, is so helpful, and really making that a refreshing couple of days so that you're not worried about coming back to the pile of emails that, were coming through, or you're looking at them while you're supposed to be off, right? Because
exactly,
you don't want to be caught off guard when you come back that Monday.
Well, I know the things that you're sharing right now are really resonating with business leaders, people managers, HR leaders, CHROs, and it's, common theme for the past, what are we now, 13, 14 months into this pandemic reality. But what do you see as the next round of challenges, and what do we need to start solutioning for as it relates to talent development and our employee investments?
I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I'm seeing a lot of announcements coming out. I've been talking to some colleagues about, when's the back to the office notes going to start coming, and they're starting to come. I think a lot of companies are trying to put that word out there to say, we're going to figure this out in the next couple of months. Things are going to start transitioning, hopefully by early fall. I don't feel like it's going to end up, okay, everybody go back to work. Right? There's going to be this hybrid model probably for the foreseeable future, I would imagine. And as a talent development, professional within my organization, how does that impact what I'm trying to do? And it's like leadership training. I have to think about, okay, I can't just deliver this in face-to-face training. I have to do virtual, right? So how do I think about these things as we're looking at programs, things like performance management, setting those expectations become even more important because you're going to have this split workforce, right? You're not going to be all sitting around a conference table talking about the daily objectives. How do you adapt, and how do you pivot to accommodate for a lot of those types of things?
So for a minute, a lot of companies, as you know, have been in survival mode. So it really piques my interest to hear you talk about leadership training. What type of training are organizations investing in their people right now? Or what do you recommend that they do?
I feel like this is the time to do it, right? The people focus has taken the forefront for a lot of different reasons. I think making sure that our leadership is equipped with the tools that they need to be successful in this time of transformation. I work in the media industry right now, and specifically newspapers, and we're going through, and it started before COVID. People say that it's aged 5 years within the last year because it's kind of been such a quick, everything's kind of accelerated, but we're in the middle of a digital transformation, which is huge within our industry, right? So we need to make sure that the managers are understanding this transformation, that they're equipped with the tools to lead the individuals underneath them. So that leadership training for us is incredibly important. And we can craft that to include not just, your typical topics like coaching and feedback and those sorts of things, but how do you manage a remote workforce? Right. How do you motivate employees in this particular time? And who's to say this is, this may be coming to an end as far as, COVID and a pandemic, hopefully, fingers crossed. But what's the next thing going to be, right? I think we've all become innately aware that, the days of just normal and just quiet lives is no longer the normal. It's what's going to happen next, and making sure people are prepared for that and being able to lead change. That's really become an important skill set for a leader. How do you become a leader of change, knowing that that's going to be a constant iteration within the business world these days? So we're actually getting ready to launch a pretty massive leadership training for our management population this summer. And it's going to be virtual, and it's this new concept of learning in the flow of work, because you can't just take 4 days and sit on a Zoom call, right? It's not engaging. It's not healthy. People can't turn off their day jobs like that now. So we're embedding it in, we call it learning in the flow of work.
Oh, I hadn't heard that before. Learning in the flow of work. That's good.
Yeah.
Any other type of training concepts or topics, Julianne, that you recommend?
Obviously the topics of DEI is incredibly prominent. I think it's interesting. I was listening to a podcast earlier today, and it kind of got me thinking about, the whole concept of diversity and equity and inclusion has been around a long time. I think a lot of organizations have had individuals working on it, but it's always kind of felt like separate department. They're working on separate programs, right, within the organization. And it kind of was just off to the side. And I feel like
feel that way?
To me, no. I honestly feel like, and again, just with the organizations that I've been working with, it's now becoming part of the everyday culture. It's woven into every conversation that I'm having about talent development. So it's like this manager training program that we're working on, heavy focus on the diversity and the inclusion side, by saying, okay, how can you make sure that your development is accessible to everybody, right? Not just the person working in the office job, but development for the guy who's working the press. You know what I mean? It's like development needs to be accessible to everybody. We can't just take it and put it in a certain department and allow those people to be successful with their careers within the organization. So I feel like it's becoming ingrained in the culture, similar to like when I worked in oil and gas, and safety was, everybody had to focus on safety, right? That was the first and foremost of everything that we did, was all about safety. Right. And I feel like the conversations that we're having with the DEI is not at that level. Hopefully we'll get there. That's obviously the journey that we're heading on, but it's at the table every time we have a conversation. How are we looking at data? We're in this age of data, and data is so important, and it really needs to be driving a lot of what we do. And what data are we looking at? We look at performance reviews, and how are women and men different in how they're being rated, and or is it equal as far as, my last organization, we did this whole thing, are men overrated versus women being overrated? How does that appear? And you look at the data, and it's amazing the stories that will come out of that, and the analysis and the learnings, and it can totally drive the direction of how we develop our people. We've got so much information available to us now, and now more than ever, we're using it to drive decisions that we're making regarding our people and how the organizations prioritize things. We think about, from an HR perspective, there's 1,000 different things that we can be working on, but we really need to focus on what's important and what is the data telling us, right? What are the employees asking for? Do they want development? Do they want, XYZ? Do they feel like this is going to be a value add? If it doesn't support the business objectives, then why are we doing it?
As I'm talking to you, Julianne, I'm reminded also too that during this time period, many employees are really focused on how their companies are supporting the community. and the stances that they're taking on tough topics that are happening external to organizations. Any thoughts there about how TD leaders should be addressing community outreach or potentially offering opinions on societal issues? Are you seeing movement in those spaces?
To some extent. I mean, the vantage point that I have is really from the organizations that I've worked for. I think currently, because I work for a media company, they're very vocal about that, right? So we're reporting on what's happening in our community. So it's naturally flowing through the work that we do every day. I think the leadership of our organization is taking the stand to say, we absolutely 100% support the underrepresented or whatever the issue is that's currently happening within our society. And we'll actually even back it up with financial support, right? So they're not just saying, oh, yes, we totally understand that what's happening is not right. If you need help and support, we've provided these resources. But they've also gone to say, we've also decided we're going to financially support these organizations. We've vetted them. If you would like to contribute, we'll match, right? So I feel like that's it's impacting the company. And to me, that's again, what's making that conversation from a DEI perspective show up more. It's a conversation that's happening every day. And part of our conversations that were happening within the HR and our talent development teams, and even with the colleagues that I network off on various different groups that I'm a part of, it's the same thing. Companies are trying to do different things. And I think it comes down to, who do you work for, right? Some companies are small and may not necessarily have the resources to do that. But by vocalizing the support for the employees, that's a different way that they can be supportive without necessarily having to provide millions of dollars if they don't have it. So,
right. Let me circle back to some of the comments you made about inclusion and DE&I focus. What are some of the areas along the spectrum of diversity where you're focused? What are some of the demographics that you're focused on?
For me personally, within my current role,
yes.
So I've been with the organization for 3 months. And so I'm still learning a lot of different things about what's new. What are some things that are, innate to the organization, have been around a while. I have a colleague who is extremely talented when it comes to data and has been able to pull together all these dashboards so that we can quickly kind of see, performance reviews. How did we do? And he and I have had many conversations to say, it's one thing to be able to report on the data. The next step is, what is the data telling you and what are we going to do about it? Mm-hmm. Right. And that was, I would say, one of my biggest takeaways when I worked at Seadra was, data is great. And I used to think, I can build all these pie charts and all these graphs. I can talk about, all these great, wonderful things. But at the end of the day, it's just presenting information. It's not going to change anything. So we're getting to the point where we're collecting the data and we're presenting the data. We're building programs to help support the change that we desire. I think the stage that we're at now is articulating what we want and then making sure that what we're doing matches that, right? Mm-hmm. So there's 1,000 different things that will present itself as opportunities. We can't do them all.
Right.
So how do we take that? In the conversations that I had with this particular colleague, I'm like, okay, there's 1,000 different programs that we could be doing, but we don't have the resources to do them all. And 2, I think the business would reject half of them just because it's overload, right? It's too much. How do we prioritize so that they're impactful? It's the right things to do that we should be doing that are going to be impactful. So sponsorship is one thing that we're working on right now. We just launched, we're getting ready to launch a pilot, I should say, for sponsorship, which is important. And it was, again, this podcast that I was listening to earlier was talking about, having capital, and it was organizational capital and hierarchy capital, and using that capital that you have as a leader and pulling somebody else up to the ranks that may not necessarily have that advantage. And that's really what our sponsorship program is doing, is it's really identifying individuals that may be hidden, underappreciated, underutilized, and how can that capital be used in a positive way to help pull that person up into a spotlight that they wouldn't necessarily have had the opportunity to be in. So that's something that we're getting ready to launch. We've done mentor program that was piloted, and they're getting ready to do a full rollout here in the next couple of months to give opportunity for more formal mentoring programs. which I'm excited to be participating in. That's not something I've ever taken a formal role for. So I'm excited to be able to participate in that and build those relationships, right? Allow somebody an opportunity to network with somebody that they wouldn't necessarily have crossed paths with before.
I'm so glad we're touching on this. Mentorship and sponsorship function very differently. A lot of people don't necessarily understand the difference, and they're both so important. So when I think of mentorship, Julianne, I think of the person or people who help me develop, who help me to become better at an express skill set. My sponsor, though, is the one who is helping to create path, create opportunity. He or she is the person who is speaking about me in a positive way when I'm not in the room, making sure that I'm getting those great assignments. And you need to have both in place. A lot of organizations have tremendous mentorship programs, but when it's time for that key opportunity, when it's time for that stretch assignment, who's getting those assignments? And that's where the sponsorship piece comes in. So I'm excited to hear you say you have a sponsorship program.
Yes. And, as we roll out some programs that I'm working on, how can we connect the two? Right now, it's just kind of off by itself. And so it's a little bit more challenging to determine what sort of projects can we be putting people on, that sort of thing. So hopefully we'll build a program that will kind of attach to the sponsorship program and really making it, kind of full circle. So it's the recognition of participating in this program. You have the sponsor to help elevate you and help you through your career. You get the exposure, and then you kind of, earn that promotion or earn that recognition or, whatever it is that's kind of coming your way.
You mentioned earlier management development and leadership development programs, and we have the next generation, next gen or Gen Z that's now entering the workforce. That's really exciting as you think about the topics in talent development. Any thoughts there about training your managers to manage and lead this new generation that's now coming into our workplaces?
So, as we have these new generations coming in, the research and the studies talk about how everybody wants to just be handed a new job, right? You hand me the job, I want to be promoted, I expect to be a CEO in 5 years. Is that really true? Probably not. But, it's important for these individuals to understand they're the ones driving their career. Your manager there is to guide you and support you, but it's not their job to hand you things, right? And so really that's what we look at from a training perspective when we work with these managers, is to say your role as a coach and a guide and a mentor, and identifying and working with those individuals to understand what is it that they want? What are you looking for? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? What goals do you have? Having those conversations with them and then helping them achieve those, whether it's working on a different project in a different department so that they can get the exposure. I think something that's been trending for a while now that I still see extreme amounts of value in are rotational programs. You think about trying to pick a major in college and how overwhelming that can be. And sometimes you think you want to do one thing. Me, for example, was going to be an engineer because I love science. I loved all that stuff. And I got into college as an engineer and was like, this does not fit my personality. I may love all these things, but this is not my personality. And I was miserable for 2 years. And so then somebody mentioned, well, maybe you should go be marketing and business. And I was like, I never thought of that. Flipped my major and was immediately like, oh my God, this is fantastic. Well, I would never have known that left to my own devices, right? So I think those development programs for people coming out of college to expose them to different areas is extremely valuable. One, it gives the individual an opportunity to see a variety of different things. Two, it provides a great foundation so that the company then has leverage, right? If I've seen 10 different things, then I can potentially go 10 different directions. Whereas if I come in doing one thing, I feel like I'm pretty much siloing myself to a career that's, one line. Hopefully it's up. So those programs are mutually beneficial. And I feel they will continue to be beneficial, and organizations should really leverage that mentality of broadening individuals earlier in their career so that they are educated in making decisions on how they want to progress and really be the drivers of where their career goes.
I love that story. To think of you as an engineer, Julianne, makes me chuckle a little bit. never considered that as a career option that you would have been interested in. But so thankful for that person who saw something in you that you didn't see in yourself.
Mhm.
But then also too, you were open. You went with the flow. You received the feedback, and it just set you on a very different career trajectory, one that
Mhm.
you've been very happy with. So I think that's a great story, and it speaks to the power of mentorship, the power of effective management. It almost encapsulates all of that into
Right.
one succinct point.
Very good. Well, I did that on purpose.
So we are in, I guess now officially Q2 of 2021.
Oh my gosh, time
And
is flying.
I know it is flying. What do you see on the horizon in terms of how we as leaders need to help our organizations prepare for 2022 and for some of the talent development trends that you see happening as we get further through this recovery period, I'll call it?
I think it's really important for HR, leaders and especially from the talent development side, that they're in lockstep with the business leaders, right? What is our goal for 2022? What are we going to be doing? What's on our agenda from an accomplishment perspective? I think a lot of companies had to do a little bit of a step back last year, and aggressive plans of what they wanted to do, they had to pare that down because it wasn't achievable given the current environment, whether it was workforce not available, markets were tanking, all that stuff had a huge impact on, business strategies and models around the world. So regrouping for this year, what is it that we have that we want to accomplish? Is it achievable? And making sure that HR has a seat at that table so that what we work on and what our organization is doing to support that matches, right? I always think of, I'm a huge analogy person, and my favorite analogy is in Finding Nemo, where at the end of the movie, all the fish are in the net and they're all going crazy trying to get out of this net, right? And I guess it's Marlin or Dory, I forget, or Dory's in the net. It must be Nemo. And he's like, everybody needs to swim down. And they're basically trying to communicate to that whole big net of fish to swim down. And if they all go in the same direction, they'll break the net and be freed, right? So it's aligning your organization so that you're all going in the same direction, whether that's business objectives, individual objectives, the priorities that you're working on from an HR perspective, so that you can achieve those goals. And I think that focus has to be laser sharp, especially now, because you don't have the benefit of all the periphery. You can't have all this extra stuff. We don't have time for it. People are trying to manage and get their lives back up and get their feet back under them. And we just need to be laser focused. So that's where I really feel like we need to be focusing on this year and into next year, really.
I love it. I love it. So HR leaders that are listening, go watch Finding Nemo
Swim down.
and pull some of the salient learning points to apply to your 2022 strategy. So thank you for that, Julianne. I love it. I'm going to go watch that movie again this week. Let's have a little bit of fun before we hang up. Other than Finding Nemo, what are some other movies that maybe you've been watching while you've been spending more time at home?
Goodness, what movies have we watched? Well, I have 3 kids, so there's been a lot of Disney Plus.
Of course.
We watched Soul. What were some of the other new ones that came out during this pandemic? Safe Haven.
Okay.
With Julianne Hough and Josh Duhamel. That was a cheesy one. We went to the theaters and saw Tom and Jerry, and that was a really cute movie.
Okay.
We actually you can rent the whole movie theater, and we just took some friends that we've been kind of in our bubble, and we all went to the movies. It was great. It was nice to be back in a theater.
I'm sure that theater popcorn was very tasty too.
Oh, that was the whole reason why I went. I was missing my movie popcorn.
Well, Julianne, you've given some great advice today, and I appreciate you spending some time. And I think you've given us some very realistic, practical perspectives, but then also to just reminding us of hope and that things will get better, and that we as organization leaders can move forward and continue to make investments in our people, which is so important. So thanks again for your insight.
You're welcome. This was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
Yes, we will do it again soon.
All right.
Thank you for listening to ESG Decoded. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you consume yours and follow ESG Decoded and Global Affairs Associates across social media platforms. Until our next episode, take what you learned today to drive long-term value for your organization by doing good for people and for the planet.